Yeah.
Okay. So hello and welcome to our Mile 27 family. I am Cathy Duffy, and with me today is head coach and founder of Mile 27 and the Mile 27 podcast, Andy Dubois. Andy, welcome to your podcast today.
Welcome, Cathy. Good to see you again.
Yes, I'm excited about today's topic. Today we're going to discuss all things elite, and Andy does actually have a cohort of elite level athletes, so he's definitely the right person to be in the hot seat today. One of which is Sunmaya, a Nepalese athlete who has just finished the Sagai 105-kilometer trail run in China with the win, and we were just having a chat about this win because it was just off the back of a race 2 weeks before where she's got the course record for both races. Is that correct?
Yeah, she did another race in China 2 weeks before that, 60K, and won and broke the course record for that race. And then 2 weeks later, did the 100K race and won and broke the course record for that race. So we'll chat about her and how she can do stuff like that shortly.
Absolutely, and a sensational effort. And I have seen on social media that she's, I think, off enjoying a bit of time off now, tripping around. So that's very exciting. So and that brings us to our topic of elite athletes. And I think people do have a natural curiosity around elite athletes. We do have better access to them with social media and things like in UTMB, we've got mountain bike riders following athletes. So it's almost like we can be there right with them whilst they're actually competing. Personally, I think I've had two pivotal experiences in my own racing that has really highlighted how elites can be a different breed in one sense. First of all, I remember a race many years ago. It was the Hounslow Classic. It's in the Blue Mountains in New South Wales, Australia. Very mountainous technical course. There was an out and back section. And I do recall on my steep ascent, Ben Duffus, one of our own coaches, actually coming back down. And I literally remember the moment where my jaw dropped. I could not believe how gracefully he was coming down this technical section that would have most of us kind of like skipping down on our bottoms. The second, I guess, example was, it was one of my very early trail runs, and it wasn't an ultra, it was a half marathon. But again, on that out and back section, I recall seeing how hard these front runners were actually working. At the time, I remember thinking, geez, I'm not working anywhere near as hard. And I picked up the pace. And the end of the story is I did get a PB, which was great. But I guess these two examples to me highlighted how physically and mentally these athletes felt at times very different to me. And I guess it guided me on my path to work on my technical trail skills and get that mental sort of fortitude that you need to complete ultras. Elite athletes, they may actually look like us, but there are some differences. So that's why we actually are going to discuss elite athletes today and see if the rest of us can actually learn something from the elite athlete. I guess I want to set the scene and be very clear about how we define an elite athlete. So I'm going to get you to answer that, Andy. How would we define an elite level athlete?
Yeah, I mean, everyone's got different definitions, but I think for me, it's a case of, is the athlete capable of podium at a relatively high quality race? I mean, a decade or two ago, I kind of half thought of myself as an elite, but I was kidding myself. Like, I'd won a few 100-mile races but small fields, and the times could be easily beaten by proper athletes. So for me, for elites, we're talking people that can podium on any race around the world, whether it be in Australia or Asia or Europe or America. And the next level of elite, because you've got people who have normal jobs that are extremely competitive and can podium. Then you've got the level above that, which is like someone like Sunmaya, whose full-time job is to run. That's all they do. And trail running is growing as a sport, especially over the last kind of 5 to 10 years. And there are a number of athletes now who make a living just trail running through sponsorships and prize money and a combination of both. So they're the true elites that can just do nothing but run and race. And many of us would like to do that, but we don't have the ability or the time.
Absolutely. So to be clear, we're talking about overall race winners. Is there a place at these sort of international level events like UTMB for podium age group winners? Would you refer to them as elites, or we're just really specifically looking at overall race winners?
Yeah, look, age group winners is an interesting one, because I know from my experience in Ironman, some of the age group winners, were 20th, top 30, top 40 overall. So in a field of 2,000 people, if you're finishing top 40, you could probably call yourself an elite, even though you're competing as an age grouper. In trail running, we're not similar. The focus on age groups is certainly nowhere near as big as it is in triathlon. And triathlon is very much, if you didn't compete in the elite category, you were definitely your focus was on age group. If you were of a decent caliber, I know when I was racing, I was always looking at where I finished in my age group. Whereas trail runners, we don't tend to see that as much. That might be forthcoming with Ironman's takeover of all things trail running, or almost all things trail running. There might be a bigger push for age groups. I know in qualifying for UTMB now, age group winners do get a spot into UTMB races. So it is becoming more pronounced. But I don't think you can really make a determination whether an age group athlete, age group winner, age group podium is elite or not, because it depends on what the rest of the field's doing. You could win your age group and finish 50th overall, or win your age group and finish 10th overall. We're more talking just ignoring age groups. Are you finishing in the top few percentage of the field and you're an elite?
So those that know me might be surprised, and those that don't know me, just to clarify, I'm not an elite level athlete, unless Andy, you would like to, I guess, step in and say otherwise. His lips are sealed for those that aren't on the video at the moment. Thank you. So I'm going to put you on the spot. Do elite athletes train differently? Yes or no?
Yes.
Excellent. And I know that you're itching. I know that you're itching to give more context and more information, but we will absolutely get there. But we're looking at, I guess, athletes that are really operating at an international level at the pointy end of the field. They're getting on podiums, and most of them, I guess, have the ability to dedicate their time to training and racing. There are the people like, I think the UTMB winner was actually a full-time worker who, who also took out the podium. So it's nice to see that also those people who don't have the luxury of full-time sort of training can still do well. Right, let's dive into how they train. Do they periodize the same? And by periodize, I mean we sort of look at base build, peak, taper, sort of recovery, that kind of model when we're planning training. Do they follow the same premise?
They follow the same principles. Like all the elites that I coach, we follow the same basic premise in terms of building and periodizing our training. With elites, we tend to look at a yearly or even 2 or 3 years ahead and think about where they want to be, what races they want to get into. Because when you start looking at races like UTMB or the World Champs, World Trail Champs, etc., you've got to start thinking about qualifying races, getting yourself selected for a team, getting yourself the points you need to get into the races you want to do well at. And that's not something you can just say, okay, I want to do it now, November, I'll do the race in January, I can do the World Champs in July. It's like you have to look 12, 18, 2 years in advance to kind of plan your race schedule. So typically for the elites, we're looking longer ahead, further ahead than most of the age groupers, or when I say age groupers, non-elites that I train. So for those who aren't elite, we usually just pick the next race, whether it might be UTA 100 or Hong Kong 100, or it might be a race 3, 4, 5, 6 months in advance. And we're kind of looking to that race, and our training is focused on that race. Whereas for the elites, there will be a discussion fairly early on in, okay, this year's done, next year and the year after, where are we heading? What are we looking towards? What races do you want to peak at? Where do you see yourself going in terms of, do you want to stick to 50K, 100K, 100 mile? And really looking at a 2 or 3 year plan rather than a 3 to 6 month plan. So the periodization principles themselves are the same, but we're just looking longer term.
Gotcha. So you mentioned which races you want to peak at. Is it individual? So is it in consideration to each athlete? Do you find there's an optimal amount of races that they can peak at in the year?
Yeah, that's what I've learnt coaching elites for the last kind of 10, 15 years or so, is the variety and the differences between what they can handle continually amazes me. Now, there are some people who can't race that often, but when they do race really, really well. Other people, the frequency of their racing and their ability to back up race after race it continually amazes me. I mean, we mentioned Sunmaya before, 2 weeks between races. One was a 60K race, winning course record. 2 weeks later, 100K race, winning course record. Another athlete of mine, the Japanese athlete Hisashi, he came second at the Asia Trail Master Championships. And then a week later, ran a PB half marathon. A week later, ran another half marathon in hotter, humid conditions, only 30 seconds slower. 2 weeks later, came second in a 50K race.
Wow.
So
So are they the exception to the rule, do you think? Or do you find...
I think what happens, from what I've seen, the more volume and more consistent training you do, the better you are able to recover from races, and therefore the more frequently you can race. It does obviously depend on the race, like 100-mile races at an elite level will take more out than 50 or 100K races. So it does definitely depend on the race. And we've seen very few elites back up with 100-mile wins. Courtney Delwater's one exception. But very few people of, the Western States UTMB doubles are a very hard one to crack. So we know once you get up to 100 miles that recovery does take a lot longer. But at 50 to 100K, those athletes doing high volume training tend to be able to recover a lot quicker and back up more consistently race-wise.
So off the back of that, then I guess, do you see the longer, so that the more years an elite athlete has under their belt, then they can handle a greater racing load?
Definitely, because volume's something that's, most of us who aren't elite think of training volume and consistency in terms of like a 12-week block. Can we get a consistent 12-week block in before the next race? Whereas when we're talking building up to elite level performance and racing more frequently, we're talking consistency over years, 2, 3, 4 years, rather than 2, 3, 4 months. And when you're doing 100+ Ks week in, week out for years, what the human body is capable of is quite amazing. But that takes time. And for most of us, we just don't have the time to run 120, 140, 160 Ks a week, every week, month in, month out, year in, year out, to get to that kind of performance level.
And it's interesting, I guess, if I reflect on my own personal experience, I remember when I did my first marathon, it took me months to recover from that. And then I look at my sort of, I guess, the peak year that I had in 2022. I think I did 2 or 3 100-kilometer races, a 50, and I paced somebody. So I guess even for me, after 10, 11 years of training, what I was coping with was drastically different. So I guess that's similar to elite athletes.
Yeah, very, yep, exactly the same. I mean, when I first started running, I remember my first 35-kilometer training run, and I was so pumped that I'd run. It was the first, when you start getting into long distance running, and every long run is the longest run you've ever done in your life. So
Yes.
For me, doing Ironman, like I never run a marathon before, so I came home from a 35-kilometer training run, really pumped that I just run 35 Ks and was wiped for the rest of the day. Yeah. Whereas, once I was in my peak ultra fitness, I'd do a 25, 30K run on Friday night and followed up with a 50K run Saturday morning and be out Saturday night and feel absolutely fine, like I'd done almost nothing. So the body's ability to adapt to consistent progressive overload is amazing. What many of us either don't do or don't have the ability due to work commitments and family commitments is to keep that consistency in, week out, or have a recovery to be able to handle that.
And I think that's good for our listeners to take on board, is that if you're newer and you do have that fatigue after those longer runs, with time and consistency, you'll be able to tolerate a greater load, just like the elite level athletes. So they've got high volume of training. Their racing plans are over many years often. Do you always factor in an off season for them?
Really depends on their training schedule, but they're human, so we do need some downtime. How much downtime depends hugely on the athlete. Like some athletes really need 2 or 3 weeks of very little training, just easy runs without anything really programmed, just to really switch off mentally and physically. Other athletes, even if I gave them that, they would do more. So they just don't want to. Their body doesn't need to. Mentally, they're still feeling like they want to run every day. So then it's just a case of keeping the intensity down to make sure their body is ready to go into the next hard phase. But yeah, I mean, everyone needs an off season of some description. It just differs, and differs hugely with elite. Just the same as the rest of us, it differs hugely. For some of us, after a big race, we like to have a whole month of not off, but like doing very little. Whereas other people, as soon as their legs have recovered from that initial muscle soreness, they want to get back into some form of training. And it's just a case of listening to your body and mind and seeing how fresh you are.
Absolutely. I'm curious for those athletes that might be, I guess, sponsored. Do you think that impacts their, I guess, acceptance of having an off season? Do they feel a pressure to keep racing for their sponsors?
There is definitely a pressure. There's, Sunmaya, for example, we have quite a few discussions with her manager, myself and her, about the balance between keeping her sponsors happy and keeping her body happy and keeping her racing optimally. Fortunately, so far, the sponsors have been very supportive on the decisions we've made, and there's been no issues at all. But I'm sure other sponsors may or may not be as supportive. But I think that's one issue with sponsorship being your main source of income is that, they're paying your wages essentially, so they want return on that. So they want to see you racing regularly. And if you talk to different elites, different companies have different reputations in terms of how much they push their athletes to race more or less frequently and do what's best for the company or for the athlete. Ideally, you want obviously both the athlete and the company to be a win-win situation. Unfortunately, that's not always the case, but it is difficult. It is a conversation that we often have.
Yeah, and I was just curious. I'm not a sponsored athlete unless Hocker wants to sort of step up and throw some shoes my way. I'm more than happy to go down that pathway, literally. So another question I'm sort of curious about is we look at a race like UTMB. I think the cutoff's 46 hours.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the bulk of the field come through around that 41 to 43, 44 hours would be the average finishing time. Whereas the people that are winning are around 20 hours. So they're doing it twice as fast. So they're not on their feet as long as the rest of us. So why do they need to have a bigger volume, or do they have a bigger volume because they're not on their feet as long?
Yeah, so volume-wise, pretty much all my elites do more volume than the rest of the athletes I coach. Whether that includes the full-time workers as well. They may not be doing as much. Like my elites range from 90 to 100k a week to 160 plus a week, just depending on the athlete. We know with volume though, the more volume you do, the better you get. It's just one of those things. There's a reason that, even if you're racing 3,000 meters, 5,000 track races, those guys are still running 100 miles a week. So the more running you do, the more efficient you get, the more fatigue resistance you have, and the better you're able to handle the end stages of an ultra, because you've got that conditioning in the legs. And everyone who's done ultras knows that, the biggest thing that happens, or one of the biggest things that happens in the back half of the ultra, is your legs just get so sore that running at any kind of speed is pretty much, it's a battle. It's a big battle. So the more volume you can have, with caveats, of course, in terms of have you got enough time to recover from that volume and making sure you're not getting injured, but the more volume you have, the better. And at least just prioritize things a little bit differently, because, racing and training for them is their number one thing. And that's probably one of the biggest differences between somebody who's doing the sport for fun. They might be competitive. I'm not saying they're not competitive. Someone who's racing sub 14 hours for 100k in UTA 100 or Hong Kong 100 or whatever. It's not like they don't want to get the best out of themselves. It's not like they're not motivated. It's not like they don't want to push hard or really dive deep into pushing as hard as they possibly can. It's just that they've got jobs that are demanding. They've got families that take time. They've got a lot of other responsibilities. Whereas the elites, even if they're working full time, they find a way to make sure running is the number one thing. And they have either supportive partners who work around that, supportive jobs who work around that. And some of my elites still work full time and have got families, but they just find a way to make running the number one priority. So, for example, doing a 90-minute run first thing in the morning before work, and then doing a 90-minute run at 9:30 at night after work, after the kids have gone to bed, they will do. Whereas most of us, I just can't fit that in. Like, that means 3 hours sleep, and I can't do it, But they find a way to make it happen.
Absolutely, absolutely. So we know light and shade in your training is important. So it's not all about sort of, I guess, easy runs to get the volume up. Are they working harder in their quality or intensity sessions? Are they doing more of them? What do they look like?
So intensity-wise, look, the principles remain very, very similar. So, if you're training for 100K, I'm coaching you or you've been coached by someone else, they're probably not doing anything that different, with the exception of often they can handle 3 harder sessions a week instead of 2. So sometimes you'll see, a hard tempo session or a speed session, a hard hill session running, and then maybe a hard hill session hiking, or some short hill repeats for strides, or a third kind of harder session, or more frequent shorter races. That's not all. Some of them can only handle 2 hard sessions per week, but they can usually handle a little bit more. It's a byproduct of running more volume. If you're running more volume, you can usually over time handle a third hard session, or making the hard sessions longer or harder. So for example, if you're a 5-minute K park runner and you're doing 8 by 1K, that's 40 minutes of hard running. But if you're a 15-minute park runner, you could do 12 by 1K, and that's only 36 minutes of hard running.
Huge difference.
It's a big difference. So they're doing more running for the same time, which obviously races are measured in distance, not in time. So if you can run more in the same time at a faster pace, obviously you're going to have far greater fatigue resistance and better speed to cover that ultra, even though training time might be similar.
So recovery must play a very big role then, if the demands on their body are, I guess, such big volume and potentially more intensity, sort of high quality sessions than the rest of us are doing. Do you program in recovery, and what does that look like for an elite athlete?
So recovery is an interesting one, because you've got the elites that have the time to recover, that don't have full-time jobs or have jobs that are very flexible in terms of how they structure their work hours, which means they can get 8, 9, 10 hours sleep in they need. They can get a regular massage in. They can go to the physio once a week or once a fortnight for regular checkups. They can do all that kind of stuff. But you've also got a kind of subcategory where if your body is naturally you're genetically lucky in terms of you can just train and you don't get injured, or you're genetically lucky in that you don't seem to need as much sleep as other people. So you get these people who got lucky with the genes and then got an interest in running, and then have realized that they can still have a normal job and train hard, don't need as much sleep and don't need as much recovery. So would they do better if they had more recovery? Quite possibly. But if you're running 130, 140, 150 Ks a week and you're winning races and you're working full time and you've got a family, you're obviously doing something right.
Sounds like the magical unicorn, though, doesn't it?
Absolutely. There's a few like that. Not too many, but there are a few people like that. Not to say they're doing it easy by any stretch of the imagination. They make sacrifices more so than a lot of other people. But some of us just need more sleep. Like if you're one of those people that find that on 6 or 7 hours sleep a night, you're just always tired, then you're probably not going to handle 100-mile weeks that dip into that sleep even more. But if you're one of those lucky people who just seem to be fresh after 6 hours sleep, then that just gives you 2 more hours in the day than the rest of us to do stuff with.
I'm definitely club. Yeah, and I definitely club need more sleep. So aside from needing more sleep, what does recovery look like? Are they cross training? Is it just literally that they're not doing a physical activity on their downtimes between training? Are you wanting them to get massages to help muscles?
Yeah, look, most of them aren't cross-training for recovery. Pretty much for the reason that if you've got time to cross-train, you may as well run. Like you may as well just do some more volume. So, and if you're doing enough volume then and you've got more time, then you should sleep more. So I'm not huge on cross-training unless, we're talking non-elites now, unless that if you've had any more injuries is a big factor, but you do have more time. Then in which case, elliptical or a bike or a swim or doing some other form of physical activity will A, help more cardiovascular development, and B, probably help recovery as well. But if you've got more time to run, then running is usually the best thing to do, and take your recovery as your sleep rather than another activity. So look, the true elites that don't do anything else but work, usually they're just sleeping more. And it's usually a focus on massage and regular checkups with physios or osteos or whoever their health professionals that they see are, just to keep on top of those niggles. And that's another key thing, is like, too often we see with non-elites is they wait too long for an injury to become an injury. Like, it'll be fine, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. Oh, now it's not fine. Now I can't run for the next 2 weeks. Whereas the elites will go, I've got a little niggle here, and you'll see someone about it way sooner rather than later, because you know that from experience, if you don't do it sooner, you're going to be injured, and therefore training will be affected. Whereas if you can take action sooner rather than later, you can either keep training, modify the training, and allow the injury to settle so you can resume full training. But too many non-elites just ignore that. Maybe they're just too busy to get to see a physio or someone, a massage person, or maybe it's just denial. It's like, it'll be fine, it'll be fine. Oh no, it's not fine.
I think it's a really important point to make for the rest of us. And I've definitely, and Andy knows, been guilty of that in the past. You know, a niggle I'm running through, it's not causing any great issue. I'm still able to run until you can't. So I learned that the hard way a couple of times, and now I definitely try and be much more proactive in terms of managing injuries, right, you know, before they become much worse. So, I mean, we've spoken a little bit about the elites training. So if we've got a listener out there who's currently in a position where they don't have to work full time, and they can prioritize sleep, and they can put everything they want into their passion for running, can you make them an elite athlete, or is genetics really the ultimate key then?
Yeah, the old genes versus training debate. Look, I think genetically there is a big component of being able to be an elite. Like, I know from me, for example, I busted my ass trying to become the best triathlete I could when I was doing Ironman. And I pretty much, as we spoke in the first podcast, I pretty much trained as an elite. I was only working 20 hours a week, living at home, did very little chores at home. I was, pretty lucky, very supportive parents. And I didn't make it. Like, I did 9:19 for an Ironman, which, anyone knows. This is 25 years ago now. Back then, it got me top 30 or something in the Australian Championships. I was top 20 in Australia. But yes, by no means elite. Like, yeah, definitely not elite. And look, could I have trained harder, a bit longer, and got a little bit better? Maybe, but like, I was never going to be running. I was never going to finish an Ironman in less than 8.5 hours, which was elite back then. It was never going to happen. So genetically, I was lucky enough to be in a position where, with hard training, to get me to that level. But I think you've got those two components. You've got genetically what you've been given and how hard you're prepared to train and how long you're prepared to train for. And one doesn't make up for the other. You can't just be an elite through genes. You actually have to put in the work, because at the elite level, you'll find people with just as good as genes as you who train harder than you, and you'll soon get caught out. So you can't rely on your genes, but also, you're kidding yourself if you think hard training can get you to a 20-hour UTMB. Like, it doesn't matter. There's very, very few people who can fully achieve elite levels. But for sure, everyone can improve, and most people can improve way more than what they think they can if they have the time and ability and financial support to do that and to train for like 3 or 4 or 5 years. Most of us don't give ourselves enough time to improve. Most of us, you pick up a sport and you pick a race and you train for it, and a couple of years later you go, okay, well, I've done a 3:30 marathon, it's probably me. Whereas if you said, well, let's dedicate 10 years to this and then see how I can go. And yeah, you probably can get from 3.5 hours to sub 3, or maybe even 2:45, but you're not going to get to 2:05 or 2:10 unless there were signs earlier on that was possible. And look, you will read stories about some guy who picked up the marathon at the age of 35, and 5 years later he ran 2:15. But when you look at where their training started, like in their first year, they probably went from a 3:50 marathon with virtually zero training to a 3-hour marathon in 6 months. So they've responded much quicker than the average person, which is due to their genes. And they put in a shit ton of hard work and got from there down to 2:15 or whatever. So you can't avoid hard work.
No, that's right. And I think that's an important point to reiterate to all our listeners, is that regardless of your genetic potential, consistent work towards your goal will lead you to achieving amazing things. And it's certainly been true for me. I've spoke on a previous podcast about reaching levels that I never thought possible. And yes, I may not be an elite athlete, but geez, I feel pretty special and privileged in terms of what I've achieved. I would. Thank you. Thanks, Coach. I would like to touch a little bit more on the injury side of things, because we do know with ultra endurance events, injury is something that we need to consider, and it is something that will probably present itself for a lot of us. You did mention that elites tend to address niggles earlier than what you found in non-elite athletes. Do they do anything to kind of prevent? Do they take that step back? Are they proactive as opposed to reactive in any way? Are they doing particular strength training? Are they seeing various health professionals? What are they doing to help prevent injuries?
So I think the first thing to understand is that, despite popular opinion, if you can handle it, the more volume you run, the less injuries you get. So I think that's a bit of a misconception. People think that if you run more, you're going to get injured more. But most people, if you think about your own experience in running, when you get injuries is often when you're building up your mileage. You've come back from some time off, or you're just getting into the sport and you're trying to build up your mileage. And that's typically when injuries happen. Or the second time you get injuries is when you're trying to do more than what you've done before, which is another case of building, but you're trying to do a little bit more. Whereas when you're consistently running, whether it be 100K, 120K, or 100 mile or whatever, but when you're consistently doing it week in, week out, you're developing the ability for your body to handle that week in, week out. And because the training load doesn't increase that much over that time, like the sessions will increase because we're periodizing training, of course, but the overall training load might increase slowly, but it's pretty consistent. So because of that, the body gets very, very good at handling what you're giving it. Whereas when you're looking at races from a 3 to 6 month point of view, and you had some time off and you build up in your race, you're always in a state of building up or recovering. So the consistency is not as much. So elites get around that because they're so consistent. So they're usually less injury prone than the rest of it because of that consistency. And if you combine that with early mentioning to your coach or to your physio or to your massage therapist, hey coach, I've got a bit of a niggle in here, can you have a look at that, or tell the massage that, or your regular PT checkup or whatever. They're addressing those niggles when they first feel them, rather than waiting until there's something significant that's causing them to limp or to be in pain or not be able to run anymore. So if you combine those two approaches of having consistent training week in, week out, with addressing the niggles they get ASAP rather than waiting till they develop, and then you get athletes that hardly ever seem to be injured. And probably the athletes of mine that hardly ever seem to get injured are the higher volume athletes.
Nice. So just add a few extra Ks in my next few programs, Andy, and we'll we'll head down that. But well, it's interesting because so it's the peaks and the troughs and the constant build as opposed to the consistency, which can then predispose you to injury. And I guess that ties back into when we were discussing about having an off season, and you mentioned that a lot of your athletes will still, the running might look different, but they'll still run through their off season, which I guess then would help when they're starting to build again, because they're not starting from a lower base.
Exactly. The bigger the off season you have, the more fitness and conditioning you lose. So therefore, the more risk of injury when you're building back up again. Now, again, some people are more predisposed to injury or not getting injured than others. I mean, I've had some of my elites who, for whatever reason, they've had 2 or 3 weeks off, and I remember one guy, for example, had an ankle injury, so couldn't run for, it was about 5 or 6 weeks. And then 2 weeks after he got back into training, he wanted to do a 100K race. It was like, I don't know if that's a good idea. And he actually didn't finish that race, got 70 or 80K in, and then decided to pull the pin. But 2 or 3 weeks after that, did another race and did really, really well. So he'd gone from having almost 6 weeks off to, in the next 5 weeks, did 100K race where he DNF'd, and then another 100K race where he did really, really well. Now, for most of us, that's just a recipe for disaster. That would be just injured for the rest of the year. But some people's bodies just tend to be naturally resilient to training. They can just train and don't tend to get injured.
That
so
natural
some people
resilience. Sorry, Andy. That natural resilience. Is that just a predisposed sort of biomechanic thing that we're born with, or do you think it's more?
Yeah, I don't know. if you could follow someone from birth, you might be able to get better idea on why that might happen. But my ideas would be that the more varied and consistent your sporting background was, when I say varied and consistent, the more different kind of sports you did, but you were doing different sports consistently throughout your life, I would suspect that those athletes would be more injury resistant because they've trained their body to move in all different ways over a long period of time with different loads. So you're building up a big kind of envelope of strength and movement that they can work in. Whereas somebody who hasn't run much at all their whole life then starts running again, they haven't got that previous neuromuscular control and strength and resistance and fitness to fall back on. The brain can go, I remember we did this ages ago. So I think you'll probably find that those athletes that were always active as kids, always did different sports and never stopped doing that throughout the whole life would be more injury resistant. That's just a theory. I have no scientific evidence to base it on, but just a theory.
Yeah, there's a lot of information coming out, and I won't harp on this for too long because that will be in a podcast coming up around, I guess, the physical activity levels of children, as you were saying, and then the impacts that has on their muscles and their bone density and their strength, and especially for women as they then enter their menopausal years. What they do in the younger years does actually impact later and their predisposition for injury. So that's a really important point. So if you're listening to us and you've got kids, just get them out, get them off their devices and get them outside running around, play chasings, all those sorts of things. Have fun.
While we're on that, the studies that I have read on elite development pretty much universally say that the best international level athletes weren't the best junior athletes. They weren't the best under 10s. They weren't the best under 8s. They weren't the best even under 15s. What they found was that athletes that perform well at international level, and this is overall sports, not just running, it's over general studies over all sports. They found the athletes that perform at international standard did a variety of sports when they were kids. So there's the exception to the rule. There's always the exception, like Tiger Woods, who picked up a golf club and was 3 and became a champion. So there's always those exceptions which we hear about. What we don't hear about is as much is the athletes that played cricket and rugby and tennis and football and AFL and did some rowing and some swimming and eventually became an elite level cyclist when they were 24. Now that's more what happens. That's what the studies show, is that in general, elite level athletes have a wide background in sport when they were young.
Absolutely. And I think I remember reading, I think one of Killian's books, Killian Jornet, who was a mountaineer, a cross-country skier. And then when he burst on the UTMB scene, I recall they thought he was cheating or he was held up in the race because this unknown person was doing so well, and they hadn't sort of recorded a history of him in the ultra world, but in fact he was a very well established athlete over sort of multiple sports. So it's fascinating. It's fascinating. Just to change up, I guess, the direction a little bit, ultra trail or endurance events requires a lot of our bodies, and we need to fuel appropriately. So eating and what we put in our bodies is very, very important so we can sort of optimize our training and racing. Do elite athletes approach this? Do they eat differently? What's the story?
Look, I think when you're elite and you're going for podium, you're looking for every possible factor that can improve your performance. So I think elites will spend more time doing the little things that improve their performance. Now, when I say little things, nutrition's obviously not a little thing, but too many times I talk to athletes, particularly new people that just come on board to get coached, and we talk about previous races and what went right and what went wrong. And often it's, my stomach was really bad. I was feeling really good, and my stomach turned. And when you talk to runners about this and you ask them what kind of training did you do for your stomach, did you test your race nutrition? And at best, you might find they did a couple of runs using race nutrition, and that was all. Whereas elites, you've usually got one or two scenarios. Scenario one is someone that has just found what works for them in races. So at Sunmaya, for example, I haven't really talked about nutrition at all with Sunmaya in terms of races, because her stomach has been extremely good in all races and she's never faded. She's always strong at the end of the race. So whatever she's doing well. And like as a coach, I kind of think, well,
yeah, don't change.
I don't change. I don't want to put any thoughts in their head to confuse you, because whatever you're doing is working. Then you get the other type of athlete who's had problems with their stomach, and then they will do the work. They will train the stomach till the cows come home to try and optimize performance. And I can refer to sports nutritionists, and some of my athletes have gone through a lot of stomach training to get to the point where they can race effectively. I think elites are just prepared to do more than your average athlete to tick all the boxes possible. That's another big difference I see, is they just look at all the boxes. They want to find out all the boxes that need ticking, and they will do whatever it takes to tick those boxes. Whereas most of us, running is something we do as a hobby. Yes, we want to get better, but there's only so much time and effort we're prepared to put into doing all the little things, because we've got jobs and families and etc.
Absolutely. Do you think, because a lot of them, it is their job, it is their main focus, can they eat whatever they want outside of racing? Can they go on the burgers and the pizzas?
Can't outrun a bad diet.
Yeah.
Can't outrun a bad diet. It'll catch up with you eventually. I mean, I'm not talking about post-race, when anyone who's done a mile knows that week after you finished a mile, you just want to eat. Like, I know for me, it was fat and salt. So chips and hamburgers and ice cream, and your body's craving that kind of stuff. And
do you remember, Andy, after I finished UTMB, you sent me a message that said, I was still in Europe, and you said, go and eat your body weight in whatever you want. And then I sent you a picture where I very much was beside this grazing table that had all the food. And yeah, that was an enjoyable part of recovery.
Absolutely. But in general, look, you can't outrun a bad diet. So you'll get caught out soon enough if you're eating crap. Like, your recovery won't be what it needs to be. You'll start getting injured. You won't feel fresh. Mentally, you won't be there as much. So diet's hugely important. Fortunately, most elites are well and truly aware of that. It's more fine-tuning with the elites that we need to do. We might be checking iron levels with some of the female athletes to make sure they're feeling all right there. And it's just making sure people are eating enough of anything. It's usually the only thing, rather than what they're actually eating. It's more a case of, are they eating enough to support the training that they're doing?
Excellent. Now, I alluded earlier that one of the experiences I had in the race was very much about seeing, I guess, the intensity that front runner was completing their race. And I remember the look in their eyes and how focused they were. So mental, I guess, strength, fortitude, whatever you want to call it, do you think that naturally, do they start at a different level in terms of what they can tolerate to us? Is this something that you naturally learn over time whilst training and racing? Do you do any particular training about mental sort of strength? How did they approach mental?
Yeah, good topic, good question. So obviously the answer is going to be extremely varied depending on the person, but we'll try and cover a few of the typical examples. So a lot of elites have probably been good at other sports throughout their career before they became to be an elite trail ultra runner. So they've got that mental strength from being good at other sports when they were young that you can transfer into trail running. Now, the ability to dig deep and the ability to suffer, whether that's suffering in the last 10 minutes of a rugby game or the last 20 miles of an ultra, it's still dealing with mental pain and trying to conquer that. So I think those skills transfer really, really well, no matter what the sport, whether you're a cyclist or a swimmer or a rower or whatever. Everyone who's done any sport at a competitive level, and that might just be under 12s, under 15s. If you're super competitive, by nature of the fact you are competitive, you must have developed some mental skills to be competitive, to push harder, to get the results that you want to get. So I think there's certainly, people arrive at ultra running elite level with some mental skills already set in their brains. My job as coach is really to try and bring that out and develop them even more. So often, particularly when I get elites that are moving up, they didn't used to win races, but now they're in a position of winning races. I've had a few conversations with people, after the race, and I've gone, I got to the front of the field and like, what the hell do I do? So having those conversations about, what do you do when you're with the lead pack for the first time? How do you approach that mentally? How do you deal with the fact you're now running alongside people that you used to admire and look up to, and now you're running next to them, thinking, should I be here? Like, am I this good now? Like, and have trying to educate them on what to do in that headspace in those situations so they can bring the best of themselves out in the at race is part of the fun of being a coach. I find that really an enjoyable part of working with the elites. And everyone's different.
And that's one of the, like, it's the bonuses of having a coach with that experience that they can share with you to help prepare you for situations that are new to you. And I did mention in a previous podcast, I've got a book with all the nuggets of wisdom that you gave me leading up to my first 100-mile event. And one of them was like, you're running today, you're running this afternoon, you're running tonight, you're running tomorrow, your future is just running, don't look ahead, you're just running. And all these nuggets of wisdom, I guess, I've been able to pass on to the athletes that I train as well. And I guess they may not have directly experienced it, but these discussions and being able to visualize or process however's sort of relevant to you does help, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes a big difference when you're running along and there's two people with you and you're in the front of the race. It's like those mental strategies in dealing with, okay, so I tell my guys, you need to, when you start off with a race and in the front pack, you need to look around and go, okay, first of all, assess how you're feeling. Does the pace feel comfortable for you? Do you feel like you're pushing a little bit too fast, or does it feel quite comfortable? Then look around, look at the other guys or girls, and think, how does their form look? Do they look like they're working harder or easier? Then start noticing what happens when you descend, what happens when you're on the flat, what happens when you're on the incline, and get a sense of, are you stronger on any one of those? Or are you falling behind in any one of those? Just get a sense of how the race is playing out in terms of your strengths or weaknesses. And then that gives the athletes some confidence to know, okay, well, every time I go uphill, I notice that the other guys are just falling behind me a bit. So, okay, let's store that information in my head. So you've got some basis that later on in the race, you think, well, if they're still with me at 60K or 80K, I know there's a hill with 20K to go that I'm going to give it my all, and hopefully I'll drop them because I've noticed I've been stronger. So kind of breaking the race down and looking at the athlete's strengths and weaknesses and teaching them strategies and mental strategies to use to help stay strong. Because the thing that happens... Right.
Oh, sorry. And I was just going to say that's actually a really important point that you said, because you're encouraging your athletes to still run their own race, but I guess psychologically analyze and prepare that, not to sort of spiral that, oh my goodness, like I'm now behind. Like, it's sort of staying present in the moment, running your race and keeping that mindset that you're still in the game. Like, that's a big deal, right?
Yeah, and like a really good example is the Asia Trail Master Final with in, was it Malaysia or Borneo? I can't remember. Anyway, the two guys came first and second, Jeff Campbell and Sashi Kitamura. I coached both of them, so I had different conversations with both of them before the race in terms of how we're going to approach it. And then it got to the race. It was a very warm, humid day, as is typical in Southeast Asia at this time of year, and they started off together, but very quickly Jeff got a bit of a gap. There was a road section of gradual uphill when Jeff felt strong, so Jeff went for it. Then Asashi, I'd given Asashi some power targets, and Asashi is very experienced in races too, so he's got a very good sense of perceived effort along those power targets. But Asashi saw Jeff get ahead and looked at his watch and judged how he felt. Went, I'm just going to stick to how I'm going. So from then on, Jeff got a bit of a gap of 15 to 20 minutes over the next section. Then from that point, once he got that 15, 20 minute gap, both Jeff and Asashi ran exactly the same pace to within seconds over the next 50 kilometers. So they got to the base of the last climb, which was a decent 10 or 12 kilometer climb to the finish. And then Asashi pulled back 12 of the 15 minutes back off Jeff up the last climb because Asashi felt so strong. So what had happened is Jeff took a gamble, and I've spoken to Jeff many times about this in terms of racing. Sometimes you've got to roll the dice as an elite. Sometimes as an elite, instead of saying, I just need to pace this well, make sure I'm feeling good, sometimes you've got to look at the competitors around you, think of your own strengths and weaknesses, look at the course in front of you and roll the dice. And Jeff rolled the dice. He went, look, I'm feeling good. This section, this next 20K suits my running strengths. I don't know about the other guys, but it suits me. I'm just going to give it a little bit more and just fingers crossed I can hold on. Now, he lost, he was losing 1 or 2 minutes per kilometre up the last 10 kilometre climb, but he'd done just enough. Asashi rolled the dice as well. Asashi rolled the dice and went, look, that's too fast for me. I'm going to back, because Sashi knew that to finish up 10-kilometer climb, and Sashi, like, he trains primarily on treadmill. Like, he does 120K a week on treadmill, and almost all of that is 5% or more incline. Like, he almost never does a flat treadmill run. So it's almost always 5, 10, 12% incline. So he knew that he was going to be strong running up that last 10 kilometers. So Sashi rolled the dice and went, this early pace is a fraction too fast for me. I'm going to sit, I'm going to pace myself, and then back myself so I can catch anyone who's ahead of me on the last climb. And look, he almost did. So both of them rolled the dice. Jeff won in that situation. But it's just a good example of how elites think about races differently to the rest of us. Because the rest of us have just gone, it's a hot, humid day. I need to be conservative. I just want to, it's a very different mindset.
I love this, and look, I've got to ask, and for those that want to know a little bit more about that, Andy did write an article that's on the mile27.com.au sort of website about that, so do have a read. It's very exciting. But as their coach, it's like you had an insight to each other's game plans. You know what their strengths and weaknesses are, so you're talking to one about how to do their best and try and win. You're talking to the other about how to do their best to try and win. Like, how did you feel in that process? Like, that's exciting. Look,
I've coached both those athletes for a number of years now, so they race all over Asia. So Jeff and Sasha know each other well, and they know each other's strengths and weaknesses as well. So I wasn't giving out any trade secrets to either of them, because everything I would have said to Jeff about Sashi, he would have known already, and vice versa. Yeah. So when I first started coaching them and they started racing each other, it's like, and I don't want to give any secrets away to one, that if I wasn't coaching both of them, he never would have found out. Like, that would be unfair. But nowadays they know each other so well that they know each other's strengths and weaknesses. And it's not like I told Jeff that, look, Asashi's going to pace it really evenly. He's going to be strong in the last climb. So, if you're not ahead in the last climb, I didn't give each other's race plan.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's fun. It's fun as a coach having 2 or 3 athletes on the same podium, or racing, or in the same race.
Absolutely.
Or racing for the same podium.
You can absolutely edit this bit out, but if you had to pick a winner out of the 2 of them, did you pick it, or you just didn't know how it was going to end up?
No, I didn't pick it. No, I didn't pick it. I knew both of them had the ability to win, and always going to play out in terms of how they approach it on race day and the condition of race day. Yeah.
Fantastic. Sorry to put you on the spot. Now, I guess the next sort of point that I'm interested to learn more about is, do they have a team around them? So do your elite athletes that you train, so we've spoken about nutrition, the value of sort of potentially getting massages, strength and conditioning. Do your athletes generally need a team around them to perform at the level that they're performing at? Or again, it just depends and it's individual?
Yes, look, Sunmaya's got a bit of a team. There's me, a coach. She's got her manager, Ryan, who looks after all travel and logistics and often goes to most of the races to crew for her. And obviously she's got a sponsor, Kailash, Chinese footwear brand. And they have a manager there that helps her. And she's got a physio and various people that she works with. So she's definitely got a bit of a team. Most of the other elites I coach, they work with like Jeff and Ryan from Hong Kong, closely tied to Go On Running, which is a running shop over there, and Joint Dynamics, which is a strength conditioning physio company in Hong Kong that they kind of work with. So it's probably not it's not like you have the athlete and you have their strength coach, their nutritionist, like as a one-on-one type thing, but in a more indirect way, definitely they have access to all those people, rather than it's not like they have paid. It's not like a professional tennis coach, for example, who will travel with their team, who will travel with the masseur and the physio and their coach, and will pay all those people to travel around with them. It's not so much like that, but it's in their hometown, whether it be Hong Kong or Australia or wherever. They've got access to people, be it strength conditioning, physio, nutritionists. They have access to all those people who they do consult with, probably more regularly than the average runner will do. The average runner will only go to the physio when they're injured, whereas a lot of the elites will go to the physio once a fortnight or once a month, just as a preventative checkup kind of thing.
Do you then interact with, I guess, members of their team as their coach, or are you just looking at their running and the rest takes care of itself?
No, definitely interacting. Like I'm always want to chat with physios or sports nutritionists or strength and conditioning coaches, just to make sure we're all on the same page. We're all working with the same. Obviously, we're all working with the same goal in mind to get the best out of our athletes. But I want to know if they've got a bit of a niggle when the physio's giving them some rehab exercises, so I can understand how that might fit into their training, how I need to change their training. For sports nutritionists, for example, the sports nutritionist may have suggested to do some gut training. So I want to know for what sessions that you think that would be best at, and making sure I'm not giving her sessions that. So, for example, for gut training, we'll talk about gut training in another podcast, but you don't want to do gut training in a speed session because it's likely to throw up. So, if your nutritionist is giving you some gut training, you want to make sure it's given in the right context. Will it be easy runs or a long run? And sometimes, sports nutritionists said, look, I want to test the athlete, pushing a little bit harder. It's like, I'll give the athlete a fast finish long run. So now we're pushing them a bit harder. So it's working together to make sure we get the results that we want. Yeah.
Absolutely. I guess suffice to say, all roads lead to racing. So you've got these elite level athletes that build, peak, and then race. Do they hurt like the rest of us? Or are they able to hurt more? Are they racing at different intensities? Like, does their racing look different to ours?
Yes, definitely. Like, as you said before, UTMB, 20 hours versus 40 hours.
Yeah.
Like and people kind of just think of that as 100 miles, so intensity is the same. But if you flip that back and go, would you run a half marathon at the same pace you'd run a marathon for? And you go, well, no, obviously half marathon's much more intense than a marathon. But it's the same kind of thing. You've got athletes running a 20-hour race versus athletes running a 40-hour race. So the intensity they run 100 miles at is higher than what the average athlete will run 100 miles at, 100k, 50k, etc. The intensity is definitely higher. So for the elites, when you see them looking effortless, they are without doubt working at a higher intensity to you. Like, intensity is duration based. So unless you're running for the same duration, then you must be working at a lower intensity compared to elite, because they're running for a shorter duration, you're running for a longer duration. So they're running at a higher intensity and holding that for the same distance as you. So they're hurting more.
They hide it well, don't they? When you see some of their footage of coming through, they look very, very comfortable.
And look, that's part of the game. I've been fortunate enough to win a couple of 100-mile races, and both those races started off with the front pack, and the first 20, 30, 40 miles you're running together. And it's a game. You're trying to chat with the other people to show how comfortable you feel and try and psych them out a little bit. And you play all these mental games, and that's part of the fun of racing at the front of the pack. I was lucky enough to do that for a few races, but not an elite level. But the elites do it every single time they race at the front of the pack, and they're playing those mind games. And look, it's not like a 100-meter race where it's all showboat and all ego and stuff like that. Most of the elites get along very well. They often train together. But nevertheless, when it gets to race time, if you're training with somebody, another elite, and you train together, you start to know the signs of when they're tired. And you're looking for those signs. And likewise, you're trying to hide your own signs of getting tired, because you run with so-and-so quite often and trail runs, and you've seen when they got tired, and you've heard that foot slap a bit more. You've heard that they just start to not talk as much. So the signs of them being tired.
Oh, yeah.
So you're trying to hide and look for that in them. So
I have to admit, on some recent races where I've tried to race to the best of my potential, I come up behind another female, and I do center myself and take a breath, because when I pass her, I want to do it with confidence, so she doesn't try and chase me down. So there you go. There's my secret.
She's going to go, well, she's working really hard. Like, I don't think she can hold that up. I'll stick with her a bit, and then she'll drop behind. Yeah.
And 9 times out of 10, it actually works. It actually works. I've got to be honest. So definitely. They're working at a higher level. And you did speak about their gut training. Are they having to take in more calories to compensate for the higher level work, or is it generally the same principles during the race?
The same principles apply, but at the elite level, with that kind of intensity, if you're not taking in 60 plus grams of carbs per hour, then you probably can't compete at that level. Whereas if you're a mid-pack 100k 100-mile athlete, and for whatever reason your stomach can only handle 30, 40, 50 grams an hour, it's probably not having that much of an effect. Like, does it really matter whether you finish UTMB in 40 hours and 45 minutes or 40 hours and 20 minutes? Or no, like it doesn't have a real noticeable effect on your race. But if you're racing for a podium and you finish in 20 hours 50 minutes and the winner was 20 hours 10 minutes, well, then that 30, 40 minutes makes a big difference. It's moved you from like fifth to first, for example. So the margins are less when you're racing at the podium. So things like getting enough calories in is super important. And that's the other thing with the elite. So like, as I alluded to before with Jeff and Asashi, like rolling the dice, at the elite level, you're on the red line for a lot longer. Whereas for most of us, we don't want to take the chance of going too close to that red line. We were doing 1 or 2 big races a year. We've paid a shit ton of money to get to UTMB or wherever you've gone to. And the last thing you want is a DNF. So there's a red line. You want to go just a bit under the red line, just to make sure, you want to get to the finish. And that means going a little bit slower, but making sure you don't blow up. Fine. Very few of us are happy enough to risk things and risk a DNF or a big blowout when we're not elites, because we've paid a ton of money, given up a lot of family time, whatever, to get to this race. Finishing is the number one goal. Well, yes, we want to do well, but we're not prepared to blow up in the effort of eking out an extra 10 to 20 minutes. Whereas when you're elite, like Jeff in that race, he was prepared to blow up because he thought, this is my best chance of winning. Like in UTMB, you see it all the time, especially in the men more so than the women. But, you look at the elite pack at 30, 40, 50K, and there's 5, maybe even 10 guys there. And then you look at those 10 guys, 140Ks in, and there's probably only 2 or 3 of them left. The rest of them, they're not finishing 4th or 5th. They've blown out the back big time because they've rolled the dice, they've sat on the red line, maybe even just over the red line, and they're willing to take that risk because for them, a podium at UTMB is career defining, and that's money. It's everything in terms of the job is to get on the podiums of these races. So the risks in pushing that red line are higher because if they're not risking the red line, another athlete is. And it's going to pay off for someone. Like, and that's what it takes. Is going to do it. So you have to be prepared to risk it more as an elite to win races. You can play it safe and finish 3rd, 5th, 10th in the top 10 or whatever. But if you want to take that next step up, you've got to have that ability to go, you know what? I'm rolling the dice here. I'm on the red line. If I blow up, I blow up. But the only way I'm going to find out if I am good enough to win this is to put myself in a position to win this and see what happens. So look, that's not to say that elites always go out hard. It's like you look at the UTMB winner, Vincent Bollard, he was 20th or something at 50 or 60K. Like he wasn't in the top 5, but he ground his way through the pack and won. So it's not always to say that to win you have to go up the lead pack, but it is to say that you have to push that line and be on that line for a long period of time. And mentally, that's really tough. Like mentally, to know that you're on that line, almost breaking for hours and hours on end, is really, really tough. I only really had one experience of that in a 100K road race I did. And look, it wasn't my best race, but I started off well and then had a bad patch, and I caught up to another Australian guy, and it was the world champs in Holland, in the Netherlands. So I caught up to an Australian guy with 15K to go, and I caught up to him, but then as soon as I caught up to him, we chatted, and then he started running. And he ran just like a tiny bit faster than what I wanted to run. But every time I got back, he would turn to me and say, come on, keep up with me. Because if I didn't keep up with him, he was going to slow down. So he knew that like his best chance of finishing this race strongly was having someone right in his butt, pushing him the whole way.
You fell for it, Andy.
And I fell for it. And my God, it was the most painful 15K I've ever run in my life, like in any race, in any distance ever, because it was completely on the red line the whole time. I didn't know how I was going to keep up another 100 meters, let alone 15K. But the two of us working together, we got there, I think with 800 meters to go, I said, look, I'm done. You go. And finally he knew that he didn't need me anymore, and off he went. But that 15K, that's what elites are like for the last 50K or so of 100K races. They're right on that red line the whole time, knowing that if they slip up.
Yes. It's it's a fine line. Do you think, I've had some experiences where I've redlined it and listening to you recount yours. Do you think they enjoy their races? Like, obviously there's a sense of achievement, and if you get on a podium, that's great, that it's their living, it's their livelihood. Do you think they're actually, and when they talk to you and debrief after the race, have they actually enjoyed it?
Depends how you define enjoy, isn't it? I think all of us define enjoyment in a different way of doing
True.
ultras.
True.
I think if you don't enjoy it in that kind of different way that we do enjoy at races, if you find it just painful the whole time, then you're not backing up that often.
Yep.
You haven't got much longevity in the sport. You've got to enjoy that challenge. You've got to enjoy being on the limit for long periods of time. And I know for me and for many people doing ultras, the first bit of the race is not the enjoyable race. The first 40, 50K of 100K race is not the fun bit. The fun bit is when you get 60, 70K in and the body says, oh, I'm not so keen anymore. Let's just slow down. And that's the bit where you go, right, this is why we do ultras. Because the rest I could just do as a training run. Like I could do 40, 50K easy as a training run. That's
absolutely. It ties in with the mental preparation, isn't it? Being prepared for that when it comes. And I guess, like all of us, whether we're elite athletes or we're not elite athletes, we actually devote a lot of our time, energy, and effort towards our race goals. Do you think elite athletes process, I guess, race successes or DNFs like the rest of us? Do they move on quickly? Do they dwell because it means a lot to them and it's their livelihood? Is the post-race analysis, does that look any different with your elite athletes?
Yeah, I think it's definitely different because the elites have different goals to us. For most of us, we want to finish, and we want to finish well. We want to finish to a time that we think we're capable of. Some of us race for a position. It might be, I want to finish top 10 of my age group or something like that. But for most of us, we can't control that. We don't know who's going to turn up on the day. And if you're an age group competitor, you just never really know who's going to turn up. So saying you want to finish top 3, top 5, top 10 or whatever it's just a stab in the dark in terms of like, I'll aim for top 10, but because sometimes you could finish, you could finish top 10 and do a slower time than a previous year where you finished 20th, So whereas for elite, most of them are looking for podiums. You're looking for, I want to get on the podium. I want to finish top 5 or top 10. I want to qualify for this other race. There's more. The goals are less internally defined and more externally defined, which is where the tricky thing comes in, because the more you focus on external goals, i.e. first, third, or a particular time, the less chance you've got of achieving those goals. Whereas the more you focus on your internal goals, the things you can control, this might be another good topic for a podcast, the more you focus on what you've got control over, the more likely you are to be better at the external goals. So for the elites, it's always a case of, okay, I want to finish podium, I want to go under 10, I want to go under 12, but then I've got to take them back off that and go, okay, what processes do we need to make happen? What boxes do we need to tick to give you the best possible chance of achieving those goals? And if it doesn't happen, then we got to look after the race and go, well, what went wrong? What happened? Where can we improve? Was it just our goals, our external goals weren't aligned with our internal goals, i.e. the fitness wasn't there? Or were they, was that time, that external goal not relevant to the conditions of the race because it was too hot or too humid? Or did something go wrong in the race? Was the pacing wrong? Was the nutrition wrong, etc.? So it's more trying to marry the external with the internal goals to make sure they're aligned, because as an elite, external goals are important. Like your sponsorship stuff depends on you getting on the podium and getting exposure. Whereas as an age grouper, someone not competing for elite, if you said you want to break 14 hours at UTA because you've never done it before, and you said, well, I want to come top 50 or top 100, or if you're a female, and you ran 13:20, smashed your time goal, but you were lower down the list of athletes than you thought you were going to be, you probably couldn't care less. Like heaps of quick females came that year. Like there were so many elites from international, they're like, hardly ever come, but I smashed my goal by 40 minutes. Whereas for an elite, podium was the goal. I wanted a qualifying spot for UTMB. I had to finish top 3 to get that spot. I came 5th.
Yeah, two things. One of the things that you taught me early on was always to do the best that I can on the day, given the circumstances in front of me. And so that sounds like that holds true for both elites and non-elites, because anything could be thrown at you on race day. Weather can change, and you can't control who's going to show up on the race day. I think that's really important. And the other important thing is the post-race debrief and breaking it down. These aren't failures, these are learning opportunities. What can we improve for the next one? And I think that's important for all levels, isn't it?
Definitely. It's a slightly different conversation for the elites because their goals are slightly different to the non-elites.
So I guess to wrap everything up, it's like, what can then the rest of us learn from elite athletes? And I've just got from our discussion just a couple of things that I've written down. And Andy, if you want to add to this, let me know. But I think the first thing we can learn from elites, if we're not already doing it, is the importance of being consistent over time, because to get volume up is important, and to do that safely and to help prevent sort of injuries, this needs to be consistent over time, and over time you will get that build. That's number one. Number two is injury prevention, or focusing on niggles before they become injuries, and getting ahead of the game is very important. And it is part of, I guess, your overall view of your training and how you need to progress. Nutrition obviously is a key to support your training and racing. You need to be eating and fueling your body well. And also for a lot of us, we do need to do gut training, and we need to practice our nutrition in training, so on race we don't have any surprises that potentially lead to a DNF. The mental side of thing we actually can't diminish in any way. It's very important. At the end of an ultra, you will hurt. So how are you going to cope with that? What are your expectations? How are you going to deal with going into your second or third sunrise, which I did in a race? How are you mentally going to cope with those things? And elite athletes spend time thinking about these things and visualizing those things. If you do have a team around you, if you are going to a physio or sort of any other allied health person, make sure that everybody or your coach actually knows what's going on and include them in the conversation. That's really important. And then at the end of the day, do the best you can given what you dealt with, and don't underestimate the importance of debriefing. Do you think that sums it up pretty well, Andy? Is there anything else that the rest of us can learn from elites?
Yeah, look, the one thing that I've been thinking about through this podcast that elites do differently is they're prepared to do things that most of us aren't prepared to do in terms of training. So, for example, my Hong Kong elites, and they've got UTMB, which is obviously end of August. Anybody who knows anything about Hong Kong knows that the weather in April, May, June, July is horrendous. We're talking, for those of you who don't know Hong Kong, 35 degrees or more, super humid. Like it's really not good conditions for training. But the elites won't find excuses to not train in those conditions. They'll find ways to train in those conditions because that's what has to be done. So they will find ways to make things happen rather than find easy alternatives. Another example might be doing hill repeats. If you haven't got the type of hill necessary for the race, elites will go out and they'll travel to a hill. They'll make the effort to go to that hill to do the right kind of training, or they'll do 1,000,000 reps of a small hill, or like Hisashi does, they'll get on a treadmill and spend 100 Ks a week going up 10 to 15% gradients on a treadmill. I do sessions that other people just look at and go, I'm not doing that. That just looks like hell to me. So as a coach, I don't have to think about what the athlete will like to do. I just have to think about what's best training for the athlete. Whereas when I'm coaching non-elites, I'm always thinking about, okay, well, this might be the best athlete they could possibly do. But I know if I give that athlete that session, they will just look at me again, are you serious? Like, really? Is this really what you want me to do? And not to say that non-elites won't do hard sessions. A lot of you definitely do. But the elites take it to the next level. So, for example, not that I put myself in the category of elite, but it gives you an example of what people are prepared to do. Like when I was training for UTMB, my longest hill was 90 seconds. So I used to do 100 plus hill reps of that 90-second rep. Now, if I gave a client of mine 100 hill reps of a 90-second rep over 4 hours, you can guess that I'm going to get some words back from that pretty quickly. So what the hell, it wouldn't be well received for most people. Not all. There are some very, very motivated non-elites. without a question of a doubt. But I know for elites, I can give them whatever session I want. It doesn't matter how hard it may seem or how repetitive or how boring it may seem. They just do it. They just go, okay, coach, that's what needs to be done. I will do that session. You want me to get up at this time of the morning or this time of night? You want me to run? Whatever it is, just tell me what to do and I will do. And they'll work their life around that. Whereas for the rest of us, we haven't got that flexibility. So either from a logistics point of view, we're not able to move things around to fit the sessions in, or just from a mental point of view, we're not prepared to do the stuff that may seem particularly boring that the elites will do. But the elites will just do whatever it takes to get the results. I mean, you see like David Roach, for example, doing his treadmill sessions indoors with lots of clothes on to get ready for Javelin 100. Like, not too many of us would do hard treadmill sessions week after week after week, wearing lots of clothing indoors.
Absolutely.
It's just not things that most of us are happy to do. Like, I used to do 2 to 3 hour hiking treadmill sessions. So no variety, nothing. It's just like 15%, 2 hours, don't stop. That was it.
There's your mental prep right there, isn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's exactly right. It's just mental prep. Now, and that's the thing, like, all of us could do that. Like, there's no reason why we couldn't do, except for logistics. If you can't get to a hill and it takes extra half hour's drive to get to the hill, that's the best training. Some of us just haven't got the time for that. But things like boring sessions, be it, lots and lots of reps of the one thing or hours doing the same thing over again, we could do. It's just mentally very taxing. And some of us, for whatever reason, if you've got a hugely mentally demanding job and you've got a busy family life, then having extra mental strength to hop on a treadmill and do 2 hours of hiking or go outside and do 100 reps or something, it's like we only have a limited amount of mental strength. Like, it's not weak. Like, it's not because you're weaker than someone else. It's just a case of, well, you've got finite mental strength you've got. And elites tend to have lives that require less mental strength for the rest of their life, so they can devote more mental strength to their training. So I'm not calling anybody weak because you don't do things like that. It's just, that's reality. I don't anymore. I've got a busy job and kids, and
absolutely,
I just haven't got the strength to go out and do stuff like that at the moment. But elites find a way to do that stuff. They find a way to do the sessions that they need to do, and they just get it done regardless.
I think that's important, because there is something that distinguishes an elite level athlete from the rest of us, and that's a very valid point. But I guess the rest of us can draw out a couple of things from there. For example, rain's not a reason, and cold's not a reason not to run. I remember many years ago, I think it might have been, I don't know whether it was pre mile 27, but I'd have scheduled a run that I'd have to go out and I'd just be sitting on the bed, like, just procrastinating. And my daughter would be like, "Mum, what are you going to do if it's raining on race day? Like, you're just not going to do the race." So yeah, she definitely taught me early on just to get cracking and get the job done. But I guess all that to say is, yes, we do have lives that we have to balance around, but we can take those opportunities which can optimize our race experience. We can experience training in different weather. We might not be able to get to those mountainous trail runs every week, but we've got one athlete who alternates sort of more road, local, long run, and then a trail hilly run where she drives further to. So there are things that you can do to actually, I guess, sort of take some of the learnings from elites and help you ultimately on race day.
And the biggest mind shift for the non-elites to take is that when you start training, even if you've been training for a while, you've got the sessions that you like to do. You might be doing a bit of speed work or a bit of hill work. You're doing a long run, you're doing your easy runs, and you like your training. So then, like, often I ask when I take clients on board, what sessions do you like and what sessions do you don't like? And it might be like, I really don't like hill sessions, or I don't like speed sessions. And then I might give them some sessions, trying to coax them out of that mindset and move them into enjoying those sessions. And occasionally, not very often, but occasionally I'll get some feedback. I didn't really enjoy that session. I did it, but I didn't really enjoy it. And that's an example of where there's a potential for growth. It's like, you're doing something that we know is physically going to improve your performance, but you said you don't like doing it. So as a coach, I kind of think, okay, well, now I've got a decision to make. Do I want to continually push this kind of session, but have the athlete not enjoy it, or give more training sessions that he or she might enjoy, but it's maybe not as effective? And look, one's not right or wrong. it's a case of thinking about your mindset into your training and going, okay, well, I know this kind of training is probably good for me, but I've never done it before because I haven't really enjoyed it. Well, maybe it's your mindset that needs to change to help you enjoy it, rather than just say, I don't enjoy it, I'm not going to do it. Because as soon as we step outside our comfort zone, whether it be physically or mentally, that's when growth happens. So if you always stick to the sessions that you enjoy, even though they might be hard, then you're going to limit your potential at some stage. Whereas you can go, look, I don't enjoy these sessions, but they're probably good for me. And it's not even just a case of just doing the session even though you don't enjoy it. It's a case of trying to learn to, I wouldn't say enjoy it straight away, but at least not mind it, like not think it's a bad session. Like you can't go from hating it to, oh, no, I love that session, it's great. It's like, let's get outside your comfort zone. Let's do some sessions that you may not have enjoyed before. And let's try and change your mindset around that and flip it around a bit so you can actually not so much look forward to those sessions, but appreciate them and appreciate the benefits they give you, rather than just go, this session sucks.
Oh, 100%. And I've got to be honest, Andy, you're very subtle and clever at the way that you do this. And I'm sure Andy's going to know the story that I'm going to recount. Was the first time I was on this Hounslow course doing a training session, and it was very technical, very steep. And I finished my training session and I messaged Andy saying, I don't think I'm going to do Hounslow. It's got all my weaknesses in the one race. And he responded with, well, that's okay, but you could train your weaknesses. And I'm like, damn it. And you know what? It's become one of my most favorite races, and I've done it many, many times. So I guess thinking about why you don't like that session, is it something that you do need to develop and grow as an athlete? And for me, it absolutely was, because that is the type of racing that I enjoy. I love the steep, mountainous races.
100%. Yep. Get outside your comfort zone. That's where the growth happens.
Oh, I love that. And I guess on that note, it might be time to say thank you for joining us today. We're very grateful that you've been here, and we're glad that we can help take you the extra mile. Till next time.